So, Rabbi Hirsch, you served in the IDF as a commander, a tank commander. You also went to high school in Israel. And I'm curious, what has that done for your identity?
I think it made me who I am now. Those 7 years in Israel, if you remember from the book of Genesis, one of Pharaoh's dream is Joseph interprets 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. So I was in Israel for a total of 7 years living there, 4 years in high school and 3 years in the IDF. But those 7 years really created a formative impression on me and kind of made me the person I became. When my parents moved us, we were 4 siblings, 4 kids, and we moved to Jerusalem. They kind of threw me into high school, didn't really know Hebrew that well. And within a year and a half, I had become as Israeli or even more Israeli than the Israelis themselves and was drafted into the IDF and spent 3 years in the military there. And then I had a whole varied experience that took me to law school in London, and I spent some time back in Israel and eventually ended up here in New York in rabbinical school.
So, what took you on the route of becoming a rabbi?
Well, first of all, I can say now with 50 years of hindsight, close to 50 years, I am a better rabbi than I was a soldier. Some people are kind of built for the military. That wasn't me. I'm kind of too headstrong and I don't like taking orders from people. And I thought that I had other opportunities for me. One thing led to another. I ended up in New York preparing for the New York bar and practicing law with an Israeli firm here. And I spent about a year and a half in New York practicing law. In the meantime, I became engaged and got married to one of my classmates in law school from England. She kind of moved to New York with me. And then after we got married, it dawned on me that law wasn't my destiny either. And my father was a rabbi. And so I had never given thought to it, but I began to think about it seriously. And I left the law and started rabbinical school. We have a 5-year program. I was released from the first year in Israel, which is primarily devoted to learning Hebrew and learning about Israel. So they gave me an exemption for that, and I spent 4 years here in New York City at the Hebrew College Rabbinical School. I, of course, know many lawyers. My wife is a very prominent attorney. There was always only going to be room for one great attorney in my household, and it wasn't going to be me. So I think I made the right choice, and I feel fulfilled.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, your sermons are so extraordinarily resonant with people, and I listened to your High Holidays one in Central Park. I sort of needed the sanctuary of Central Park, and I needed your words. It was very powerful. So, when did Zionism stop being an idea and become part of who you are?
It was always who I was before I theorized. I have this general approach to human nature to begin with. I believe that our attachments primarily are first and foremost emotional, and then we rationalize why we have these attachments. So it was never an issue for me. Am I going to independently choose whether to be a Zionist or not? As a teenager, I was 14 years old and I was taken to Israel. And within a very short time, I had fallen in love with everything about Israel. The Israelis, the teens that I met were just unbelievably incredible people. The country was fairly new at the time. It was in 1973. We arrived in Israel about 3 months before the Yom Kippur War started. And that was a very formative experience for me, too. I had an older cousin who was severely wounded as a tank commander in the Sinai Desert during the Yom Kippur War. And then I remember vividly during the war, the men were drafted into the military and they sent students out to bakeries and supermarkets and factories to basically allow the country to continue to run. So the school was suspended for 6 weeks, high school. And we were out there kind of participating in the war effort. That was the impression we got. And so within a half a year of arriving in Israel and within 2 months of starting school, I had become completely Israeli to such an extent that there was a radio show that invited me and two other friends. It was kind of like a To Tell the Truth radio show where the three, in our case, three teenagers, classmates, had a secret. And this adult panel had to guess what the secret was. And the secret was, who is the new immigrant? And this was after a year and a half when I was in Israel. And they all guessed somebody else. None of them guessed me. So I had become completely Israeli by 18 months after we arrived. And, those were very formative years in terms of my identity. So it wasn't a question of thinking myself into Zionism. This was who I am. And then I understood why I am who I am.
I was actually born in Israel, September of 1973. So on the eve almost of the Yom Kippur War, and grew up there for a few years. And now my whole family moved back there after I grew up in California. And when you talk about your experience in Israel, and it's part of who you are now because you were brought into it, do you think people can feel Zionism, unwavering Zionism, until they actually go to Israel? I've never heard somebody that goes to Israel and isn't changed in some way, shape, or form. So it sounds like your earliest identity was shaped by being there. Do you think that would make a difference for people?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. And I've worked for that my entire rabbinic career, to take people to Israel. I've taken with me many thousands of people to Israel over the 35 years that I've been doing this. And I think even an 8-day experience or a 10-day experience, we know from Birthright, for example, that it does make a big difference. It's not the only thing, though, right? Because even if you go for a 10-day visit to Israel, and even if it's the best program in the history of the universe, it's still only 10 days in the life of an American Jew or a Jew that doesn't live in Israel. So it needs to be fortified by both the intellect and the emotion of the attachment to Jewish civilization, of which the Jewish religion is a central component, but not the only component. So in the diaspora, I've always felt that to some significant degree, connection with Israel is a reflection of a person's connection to Judaism. And outside of Israel, since you can't replace or replicate the environment of Jewish sovereignty, where everybody's speaking Hebrew and, the calendar is based around the Jewish calendar, and people are walking the land and they're studying Bible in school and they're studying Talmud in school. And, they're interacting with other Jews. You can't replicate that experience. And so what's especially important for Jews living outside of Israel is that they connect to the Jewish community, and the heart of the Jewish community is the synagogue. So I've always felt that it's our job to enhance Jewish identity by emphasizing the centrality of Jewish peoplehood and this Jewish notion, this ancient Jewish notion of Ahavat Israel, love for the people of Israel. And if we are able to do that, again, intellectually, but also emotionally, then I think a connection with Israel is a reflection of that, because it is who you are and have become, no matter how many times you've been to Israel, even if you've never been at all. Now, if you've never been at all, chances are that in turn is a reflection that, this Jewish content has not seeped into you as deeply as we would have liked, because the natural outcome of that would be, I've got to go to Israel. I've got to see what the modern state of Israel is like. I've got to walk the land, see all the historical sites. So you're completely right, both from the perspective that I just detailed for you, which is kind of the outgrowth of instilling a Jewish identity, but also in terms of really understanding the country. The more experiences we have in Israel, the better. And the younger that begins, the better it is.
Couldn't agree more. So as a Reform rabbi, are liberalism and Zionism actually in conflict, or has that tension been manufactured?
Well, it depends what you mean. If you mean I have a problem with the direction of this or that policy of this or that government, then people who are liberals expect liberal policies from their elected representatives. that has a certain meaning in Israel that is often a little bit different than what it means in the West in general. But fundamentally, it's a worldview. Liberalism is a worldview that emphasizes the autonomy of the individual, the freedom to do what you want to do, even to step away from the expectations of the community at large, where conservatives tend to emphasize tradition more and slower change rather than, kind of more rapid, even revolutionary change that liberals tend to incline towards. So if you mean by liberalism that we expect the Zionist government to pursue liberal policies, then of course it's an act of identification and patriotism to oppose a government that doesn't pursue your preferences in terms of what you think is the destiny of the country. We have the same in every democratic country in the world, including in the United States. That's not where most of the debate and frankly, the ideological assault against Zionism rests. Today in the West, it's not a disagreement with this or that policy of this or that government. It is a complete delegitimization of the right of the Jewish people to a state, collective self-determination in its ancient homeland. If that's what we mean by Zionism, then that is a completely, comprehensively liberal philosophy. Zionism was begun by liberals. It was pursued by liberals. At the beginning, it was mostly secular liberal Jews in Europe who articulated these Zionist ideas. And that is still where most liberals should find themselves, because liberals believe in self-determination of people's right to collective self-determination, which then brings individual and collective dignity. And so this anti-Zionism that is propounded by people on the left, some of whom call themselves progressives and some of whom call themselves liberals, like the mayor of New York, where I live, they're fundamentally illiberal. They stem from an intolerant and often rooted in anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hostility to the idea of the central idea of Judaism, which is the centrality of Jewish peoplehood.
When did Zionism begin to be recast as morally suspect in these progressive spaces?
It used to be that the progressive left, the left wing, the socialists, they were the most supportive of Israel before the Six-Day War. Something shifted after the Six-Day War, after 1967, led in part and agitated by the Soviet Union, that already very much earlier in the 20th century linked anti-Zionism with basic anti-Semitic hostility. Out of the Soviet Union came the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But fundamentally, I think, after the Six-Day War and after a long, decades-long strategy on the part of those who are ideologically committed to the destruction of the Jewish state, their investment with huge sums of money in main institutions of the West to instill in generations of younger people this philosophy of anti-Zionism, I think it kind of exploded in our faces. It was always there, but it really grew to dimensions that we kind of didn't notice. We were sort of sleeping at the wheel here for the last 20 years for sure, where billions of dollars have been invested in, among other, Muslim Brotherhood funds to turn the West against Israel, starting with the progressive left. And they've been quite successful in doing that, and it's quite concerning. Not everybody has fallen for that, but a lot have. So I think now what's happening in the main cultural institutions of the West, institutions of higher learning, the media, legal institutions, international political agencies like the United Nations, most of them have turned against Israel, and in the course of that have turned against many of their own central values. So if you take, for example, I've spoken with many, many leading Israeli feminists, some of whom have taught feminist international law and were advocates and main supporters of the international legal system. You had most feminist groups who, contrary to what they had been preaching for years, that the assumption is that women are telling the truth when they report sexual assaults, for some reason didn't believe Jewish women when they were Israelis. So what happens is this perversion of liberal values works against you. It hollows out the very main values that you've devoted your lives and careers to and your whole ideology. I think we're in crisis, and I think the American Jewish community is in crisis. I think the liberal world is in crisis, and kind of people are groping now for direction. It's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly that I, as a liberal rabbi, need to speak out as clearly as I can, because I do think it's important for people, especially young people, to have role models from the liberal world that this is a corruption of liberal values.
So, as a Reform rabbi, does it pull you away from Reform Judaism, or does it pull you into it to try to reclaim the values that brought you here in the first place?
It is Reform Judaism. We are the ones who are voicing and asserting central Reform Jewish values that have been fought for and settled on since basically the mid-20th century. The movement started, but it's been 75 years or so, call it 3 to 4 generations of Reform Jewish life in North America that has been consistently, solidly, and strongly Zionist, including establishing the international headquarters of the Reform movement in Jerusalem. That's what brought me and my siblings to Israel. My father was the head of the World Union for Progressive Judaism, the International Reform Jewish Movement, the HUCJIR. The seminary is there, the rabbinical seminary, where every rabbinical student needs to spend their first year in Israel. So this deviation that we're seeing in parts of the Reform Jewish world, they're the ones who are not reflecting Reform values and Reform principles and Reform ideology. We are actually articulating long-held beliefs that we fought for half a century as well. And I should say one other thing. Despite the impression, and we see this from some empirical studies as well, it's very important to understand most American Reform rabbis, most American Reform congregants are solidly pro-Israel, and they believe what I believe and what I articulate. Some don't. They're the relatively small minority. They need to be confronted because it's a minority that's growing to a certain degree, and it's especially the case the younger you go generationally. When you reach, say, 18 to 24-year-olds, which is the youngest that pollsters can poll people, you have a much higher degree of people who have Jews who express hostility to the idea of a Jewish state than their elders.
So to that point, how do you navigate that within your community and congregation?
If you come to the rabbinate with the idea that you are some kind of receptacle for age-old truths as transmitted in Judaism from generation to generation, beginning at Sinai, then you're compelled to speak the truth as you understand it. It's not absolute truth. It's what you understand, age-old truth that originates in Jewish tradition from Mount Sinai. And you have an obligation to speak it, how you speak it, what you say, when you say it, how you articulate it, who you speak to, and what messages different audiences, different people need to hear is all connected to the skill of the vocation, right? I mean, you could say, okay, our role is to represent the truth and speak truth to power. But if in the course of executing your obligations, what you consider to be your moral obligations, you execute them poorly or not optimally, first of all, you won't achieve everything you want to achieve. Secondly, you might actually be ineffective. So there's a premium on the art of being a rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of practice, a lot of time. There are no shortcuts, especially during these times when it's so critical in the Jewish community. There's nothing that can replace experience of doing this for a long time. And that kind of experience is especially critical during these historically momentous times.
But these are so historically momentous that you haven't had this experience before. Like we're all sort of living it for the first time, right? In real time. I'm wondering, how do you deal with Reform Jews who, for lack of a better term, I'm going to refer to them as self-hating because they are allowing themselves, say, to be tokenized. Do you have people like that in your congregation? Do you welcome people? Like, do they want to speak to you? Have they left the congregation? Again, this is the first, I assume you've encountered this degree of division.
First of all, again, I want to emphasize most Reformed Jews believe what I believe, overwhelmingly. Okay. Secondly, when it comes to our synagogue, we don't ask people what they believe if they want to join the synagogue. By now, they know what the synagogue stands for and they know what I believe. And if they want to join, and hundreds of families have joined us over the last few years because they know what we stand for. Not all of them want to be members in New York City, but a lot of them do. And a lot of them have come from other Reform synagogues where they've said to us they don't hear the message with the kind of clarity that they hear at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. So that's one of the benefits of being in a city like New York. There's basically every Jewish option that exists, which is available to you. And it's good for people to be able to have the freedom to go and find a place that is most compatible for them and is compatible with their ideas. As opposed to if you're, somewhere in another part of the country and you're the only game in town, or, there are only two synagogues around, it's much more complicated. And I have a lot of sympathy for those people. But for us, we don't ask people what they believe when they come here. One of the partners, of course, needs to be Jewish. But they come, and I say in particular to people that I don't expect them to agree with everything I say, but I still have to say it, because the role of the rabbi is not only to preach to people what they want to hear, but to tell them what we think they need to hear. Now, I say on the question of Zionism and Israel, I don't cancel anybody. By the way, this culture of cancellation is itself an illiberal concept. Liberals welcome free speech and they welcome debate, which is entirely consistent with Jewish culture of what we call machloket, disagreement for the sake of pursuing truth. So everything about Judaism unfolds in the setting of a debate. So I'm open to anybody who wants to speak with me, including people who call themselves non-Zionists or anti-Zionists. I say publicly, if you are an anti-Zionist and you want to come in and talk to me, my door is always open. And there have been people, you said you listened to some of my sermons. People listen to my sermons from all over the country and the world. And there have been people who have heard me say this, young people, and have emailed me and said, listen, I heard you say this. I hope you're serious. We're coming into town to visit family over, I don't know, Thanksgiving or Passover. Will you see us? And these are non-members. I said, of course, happy to see you, because one, I don't cancel anybody, let alone Jews, especially young Jews. And two, if they want to come talk to me, I figure they basically want to tell me why I'm wrong. And I'm open to hearing why they think I'm wrong. But there's a little part of me that also, believes, well, if they're willing to come and sit with me for 45 minutes or an hour, maybe there's a little part of them that is also open to my response, to hearing my response. And I give them some books to read. And I say, listen, here, read these books and come and connect with me after you read the book. Let me know what you think. And that's my approach. But it doesn't negate the need for the religious leaders of our community to speak the truth about Judaism. And the truth about Judaism, as conveyed to us over millennia, is the centrality of Jewish peoplehood and the hope and the prayer for the restoration of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel.
So, Rabbi Hirsch, what would you say would be the common thread, common theme that the people that take you up on your offer to speak, what is the issue that they're coming to you with? Is it regarding Israel?
Well, that's a really good question, because what most anti-Zionist Jews who say they are anti-Zionist or they have these severe problems with Israel, what most of them mean is not what Students for Justice in Palestine mean. It's not what Mayor Mamdani means. It's not what Hamas means. What they mean is October 7th. That's not what most American non-Zionist or anti-Zionist Jews mean. I think what most of them mean is they have very, very severe problems with the way successive Israeli governments have pursued various policies. And they just simply can't identify with it. I do have a modicum of sympathy for people in your generation, for example, who call themselves liberals. They grew up in liberal environments. They are proudly liberal American Jews. And essentially, all they've known for their entire lives are conservative Israeli governments. And most of them have a very ultra-Orthodox element to these governments that deny the authenticity of any other form of Judaism. And they use government power to enforce that philosophy. So I have sympathy for American Jews who didn't grow up in Israel, who, year after year, they are encountering this government and they would prefer to see different policies and different approaches. Between that, however, and encampments, leading Passover encampments on campus and joining the most severe ideological, not only critics, but enemies of Israel who seek to delegitimize not only the Jewish state, but Judaism itself. Between having problems with the Israeli government and that's where the ballgame is, and that's where we need to fill the vacuum.
I'm just curious if your hatred for the IDF and your constant speaking out against what happened in Gaza, and then utter silence about what happened with the 30,000 plus protesters in Iran, is the hatred for Jews so much greater than the love of humanity? Is that sort of the takeaway? And at what point did people in Iran become like on the Jewish side? Is it because Israel is fighting? What is the explanation for the silence of the Iranian slaughtered 30,000 people?
Yeah, so I have a podcast too, as you know, and I ask people that very question. And really, world-class thinkers and experts. And essentially, for most of them, they kind of shrug their shoulders and say anti-Semitism hasn't disappeared from the world. It just takes a new form. There is so much animosity towards Judaism and Jews that has been transmitted in Western civilization from generation to generation for people who don't even realize that they harbor these sentiments, but they carry tropes that they then extend to modern Israel and to Zionists, essentially putting on Zionists all of the hostility, the centuries-old hostility that they put on Jews. So anything connected with Israel that may put Israel in a good light is itself disruptive to their ultimate goal of destroying the Jewish state with all of their animosity towards the Jewish people as well. I think, that's it. How else do you explain? You're a woman, you're a feminist, liberal, I think. How do you explain?
Well, there's a follow-up to that, which is, at what point do these people who hate Jews so badly not fear for their own lives under jihadism in this world today? That's sort of my burning question. What's going to happen to this person when it really lands in their neighborhood in the form of a mayor or a politician, or like, what then?
Yeah, it's baffling. And what would happen if, in fact, this materialized is, in all likelihood, then they would wake up because, democracies have a tendency to wake up late, but sometimes they wake up just in time. It is entirely inconsistent with everything they say they hold dear. So why do they support that kind of stuff anyway? I mean, 30 to 40,000 Iranians, freedom fighters, people who went out into the streets to shake off this fundamentalist, extreme, radical, genocidal regime, were slaughtered in 2 days. And not only were there very few protests, the very people who you would expect to protest, who talked day and night about how Israelis were committing atrocities and genocide, just completely made up, by the way, they're silent. How do you explain that? It's just an utter hollowing out of any kind of moral sensibility. And we have an obligation to reject it on its face and to try and convey as clearly and as strongly as we can the utter hollowness of these people and the immoral blindness that they try and perpetuate throughout society.
So I like to end these interviews on a little bit of a hopeful note. What do you see is the future of the Jewish people in the most positive light at the end of this era? Is this an era that has an end? Is this an era that is indefinite? I'm asking you as a man of faith, what do I hold on to? What do I hold on to for my children in this world today?
Well, first of all, in terms of the long saga of the Jewish people, there is never an end. It continues on perpetually, as the Bible and the Torah tell us over and over again. This is a covenant for some reason, unfathomable in some level. God wants this people to survive. And we have survived when all of the other nations of antiquity have faded away into dream stuff. Even the great empires of antiquity are no more. We're not going anywhere. On some level, when I sit back and I try and explain, contrary to all the laws of history, how come we're still here? I end up, saying God wills it. So our future is bright. We're continuing. The Jewish saga will continue in perpetuity as promised already in the founding documents of Judaism and the Torah. Periods of history end. Something that characterizes an era then transitions into something else. Something has happened since October 7th that has forever changed Jewish destiny. What was will no longer be. And we've had these periods before. I'm very optimistic because, like in every such cataclysmic period in Jewish history, some have faded away. The ones who in the diaspora are not attached to the concept and the reality of the Jewish community, of Jewish peoplehood, will eventually be like leaves falling from the tree of Jewish life. And at best, an interesting footnote in the annals of Jewish civilization. The mainstream Jews will continue, and what we're seeing is not only a rise in marginal still among some American Jews in increasing animosity towards Israel and the Zionist idea, but we're seeing a resurgence of Jewish life amongst people, lots and lots of Jews since October 7th. And Israel itself, I hope, will emerge from this period stronger than ever. Already its security situation is much better than it was on October 6th, 2023. And I hope there's a passage in the Bible that talks about Vatishkot haaretz 40 shana. The land was quiet for 40 years after one of these great cataclysmic wars. And so, you know what I would take, Natalie? I would take 10 years. But I do think that after this fighting is over, while Israel will still have to be very vigilant, and to a certain degree, it's changed its military theory in not waiting, but to be more proactive. And so I think we can anticipate much of that in the years to come. Still, hope and expect that when this last round of fighting, and this should be the last round because everything from October 7th led to Tehran. It had to end in Tehran. So I hope that if the land is not tranquil for 40 years, that we'll see greater tranquility for an extended period of time. And that will give resurgence, re-energize the state of Israel. And in turn, the state of Israel will energize world Jewry.
Thanks for listening. For more, you can visit Instagram at Grace for Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please follow the show, leave a rating and review. See you next time.